Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike Navina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Piper Payne, and if you're not familiar with her, Piper is a mastering engineer based out of Nashville, Tennessee. She's worked with artists like Dolly Parton, the Go-Go's, Madame Gandhi, and a whole bunch more. And in addition to her mastering business, she also runs a vinyl manufacturing company called Physical Music Products, where they make vinyl records for artists all over the world. So she brings a really interesting perspective to this interview because she's not only a mastering engineer, but she's literally the person in charge of the machines making vinyl records for people. So she comes into it differently than just working on the audio in the mastering stage. She's literally like helping set up these machines. So I think that's a really interesting angle to come at when it comes to understanding how to best prepare your work for vinyl. But throughout this interview, she gives us a lot of really great advice so that if you're an artist who's looking to manufacture vinyl to release your record, or if you're a mastering engineer who is sending stuff off to be actually pressed, like there's a lot of great advice that she shares here in order to make sure that the process goes smoothly and that you get the highest quality results. I think that this is a really interesting episode because whether you've worked with vinyl or not, I think the technology is very fascinating. And that in itself is something that we get into, which is really cool, like how the presses actually make the records. It's kind of like, you know, what's that show? How It's Made? It's like that kind of thing, right? So we talk all about that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think you're going to find this episode really fascinating. And whether you've worked with vinyl or not, there's definitely some really cool stuff to learn here. And it's good to understand the process that goes into it so that, you know, whenever you get to that stage in your life where you need to work on vinyl or you're actually printing vinyl of your own music, you're best prepared for it. So with that said, let's just jump right into the interview. Piper Payne, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Nice to see you in person.
Of course. For people who might not be familiar with who you are, what you do, and your background in all this, can you give us that story of how you got started and what you're up to these days?
Sure. Well, there's a lot. I'll be as concise as possible, but basically I started out my original education, in music as a drummer since I was like in second grade, playing drums, playing in bands, everything from anything that I could find a way to play with an ensemble, I would figure out how to do it. And I was just really interested in the music making process and that discovery, of that like one instance of playing the drums and playing with other people. And I ended up getting into a essentially recording program, doing a lot of like electronic music composition and learning more about sound synthesis. And then I fell in love with studio recording and live recording and all that. Eventually went to Norway, did my grad school, focusing on classical recording and just like very, very intense acoustic recording. And I got involved in working studio while I was there. And that was the moment I was like, all right, I love mastering. I love recording. I love everything about trying to recreate this one moment of musical inception, and mastering really helped me sort of scratch that itch. Eventually, I got an opportunity to work with Bobcats in Florida. I went up to Canada, bounced around Canada for a while, made it out to San Francisco, worked for a mastering engineer there, and eventually opened my own mastering studio. Got my own mastering studio off the ground in the Bay Area, and eventually built it up strong enough that I got a job offer to come out to Nashville and master records. When I was in the Bay, just to back up a hair, I did have a small vinyl record pressing facility that I was involved in. And then when I got out to Nashville, I got an opportunity to do it bigger and better. And so now we're up to 6 presses online. We have 2 more going online very shortly here. I've just actually put them in place to start piping them in. I'm excited. Just last week. It's been a really wild ride. There's a lot to it, but basically mastering and cutting records and then literally pressing records in my vinyl record pressing facility consumes all of my life. Sometimes I see my wife and my dogs. Sometimes I ride my motorcycle or play with my model trains. But for the most part, I'm all consumed with making records figuratively and literally.
Yeah. So lots to cover in that story there. Like, I kind of want to go back to the school side of things, because you were talking about how like you got into this as a drummer and like you had this love of music, and that's kind of what started it all. And like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like when you applied for school that like you were maybe going in more from the musician side of things, and it happened to be a recording school, recording program, or did you know it was a recording program going in?
Well, I was really into music and I actually wanted to be a music teacher. Couldn't decide if I wanted to be a music teacher or a veterinarian for most of my high school career. And then like I figured out that I have to put animals down in order to be a veterinarian. I was like, I just can't do that. And then I really wanted to pursue, music. I didn't want to do performance, but I wanted to teach. I had built a pretty strong group of drum lesson students. And that's how I was like, I bought my first car with like drum lesson money. Like I made a pretty good amount of money teaching drum lessons in, 9th, 10th, 11th grade. But I ended up kind of putting the kibosh on that one too, because I was like, shit, if I don't want to be like my band directors that all seem to really like hate their lives and they're always upset and like pissed off and stressed out. So I decided to go into electrical engineering. I had a lot of engineering role models in my family. And so I ended up going into electrical engineering, and then found out that my program at my school, University of Michigan, had an audio recording and electronic music production program that you could kind of put this thing that I loved, music, in with electrical engineering and come up with this, actual real legit degree program, audio engineering and, music recording. And it was a really tough program to get into, but I worked my ass off and I got into the program. And I finally felt like that was what I was supposed to be doing. Like, because awesome. I always knew I always had a path I wanted to follow, but I never really felt like I was on that path until I got into that program and started actually running. So
gotcha. Yeah, I'm always intrigued by like how people get into the recording side of things, because I feel like most people start as musicians and want to be like the rock star or whatnot, and then there are some people that go to school for music and just kind of stuff, or they maybe go into a recording studio one day and like that's what sets them off, or maybe it is like there's just this recording program at school, and so it is cool to hear that like that's kind of how it worked out for you. Now, I guess once you did that, like it sounded like you were doing mixing, you were learning about mastering as well, but like what ultimately then made you go into the mastering side of things? Because a lot of people then get focused up, like once they learn about production, they learn about the miking, and a lot of people want to get into mixing. So mastering still is this kind of field that I feel like there's not as much demand.
It's such a varied set of paths, and so much of that stuff blurs too. There's like so many Venn diagrams, so many overlaps of skill sets and talent and like experiences. But at the same time, if you want to go into something so niche, like at the time, mastering, by the way, mastering today is not really a niche thing. But like when, 15 years ago, when I was starting out, in almost I'm dating myself now, like almost 20 years ago when I was in school, mastering was not a thing that there wasn't even a degree program that had a class called mastering, by the way. Like that wasn't a thing. Now it is, and that's awesome. But even something like mastering is like niche enough, but there's so much wonderful information out there, and there's so many people doing it that you can figure out how to do it yourself. And I feel like I was one of the, I have a friend, Marcella Areca, amazing mixing engineer down in Florida. She said one time we were in an interview together, and she was like, I'm a young dinosaur. Like I feel like I'm one of the very last of the little audio generations that did not have YouTube available to me to find any information I wanted to about any technique or any piece of gear. Like I had to actually read books. I had to, talk to people. I had to go to networking opportunities and conferences and things like that. Even something like Zoom, of course, did not exist, let alone audio over the internet, live or something like Audio Movers to collaborate with people all over the world. We had to actually leave the studio to go find clients, so
so ancient.
Itself, and that's one of the things though, too, is like that in itself became a skill set. And, building a career in something as niche as mastering, and then building a clientele when there's like all these old dudes that are like trying to just hold on to their businesses because all the money's gone out of the labels and like there's no money in this business anymore. As I'm coming up, these people are also literally scratching to hold on to that last little bit of money, right? And so it's like this, it's kind of a mind fuck. Like when I think back on all the crazy stuff that I had to do just to build a client base that was a reliable income stream. And if I had to do it again today, I'd do it completely differently. And so I don't know. I always talk to the like folks coming up through school. They're like, how do I get my first gigs? Or how do I know when to charge and how much to charge? And I'm like, the minute that you are so busy that you literally cannot like do one more thing, or else you're going to sacrifice sleep or eating, that's when you start to charge for your services. It's very funny because people are just like, they forget how hard it really, really is to make a career in this and make it a very stable career. And all it is relationships and being reliable and doing good work, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's interesting advice to give, because I think, I feel like I can hear people on the other side of this thinking like out loud, like, well, that's great. Like, okay, I'll start charging at that point, but how do I even get people to even give a shit to like, let me work on their stuff for free. Right. So like, how do I find those people? Right.
And that's why I said, like, if I had to do it all over again today, the market is so inundated with people and competition. And it was very competitive when I was coming up, but now it's like everyone and their mother can do what everybody else can do. The playing field is so level. You cannot rise above by just being good at something or just, by like being cool. You can't get above that noise. You have to be consistently reliable and doing good work all the time. And it will come. Like, it will absolutely come. I have someone who's been working with me for a few years now, Colby Gustafson. He's an amazing mastering engineer, and he's been working on his career. But the thing that sets him apart from his peers is that he's been focused only on this one thing. Yes, he can go out and make recordings. Yes, he can do live sound. Yes, he can help with production. But what he wants to do is extremely clear. And he's had his message clear and concise from day one. And he's only worked on mastering and building his mastering career and his clientele. And it's been a few years, but he's starting to get more and more work now. And again, it's because he's worked his ass off. He's gone to the conferences. He's been reliable. He does good work. But unfortunately, I see Colby as a very like small exception to what I've seen in a lot of the rest of the industry. I mean, we get here at Nito, we get emails for work opportunities every week at my record plant. We get work like emails for inquiries for jobs every week. And people don't even these days do the research to figure out like who we are or what we do. It's just literally like a to whom it may concern, like it almost looks like a phishing email. I had to ask 3 different people last week to provide a phone number that I could reach them at, so that I could call them to figure out what it is that they want from me for a job. Like who sends an email? Who spends the time on my website to find my email? Like, dear so-and-so, do you have any jobs? Sam or whatever. Like, come on, like, give me a little bit more.
Yeah, it's so true.
It's just, it's really funny because I worry so much for these newer folks coming into the industry because it is so hard. Like it is so hard. But I do still fall back on like, all right, the only thing you can do to build your career and build your client base is to go back to basics. Mm-hmm. Get out there, meet people, be communicative, do good work, be reliable, and show up every single time.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It will work.
Yeah, and make it so that people know how to contact you and all that kind of stuff. It's so true. Like I remember even like Even on the other end of things, like I remember when I was first starting and trying to find clients, like I would go through their websites and like try to reach out to bands and stuff like that. And like, it blew my mind how many people didn't even have their email address on their website, or like a way to contact people. And it's like, these for artists who want to get discovered, it's like, have that information on your website. Like if you think that someone's going to discover you and like sign you or whatever, it's like, give them a way to do that, but like,
and it also flops between, you're like, think about it. You're like, is it because they're scared of an opportunity, or because they're like inept and they don't really know how to do this, which is also fine. Both of those things are totally fine. But the third one that I always jump to is like, they think that they're more important. Like they're going to make somebody work for it. The assistants that I have hired and provided, and I don't hire people for no money. Like I pay anybody who spends an hour with me gets paid. We don't do like free internships or any of that bullshit. But at the same time, the only people that I have hired are the ones that make it really easy for me to hire them. They'll send me an email after seeing, maybe we meet at like an AF conference or something. Send me an email. Hey, Piper, nice to meet you. This is so-and-so. We talked about this. Here's what I'm interested in. If you have any opportunities for me, please let me know. Then they follow up. And then there's always one moment where like I have something I need right away where I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't know, name it. We have some crazy amount of denoising coming into the mastering studio 2 weeks from now. And I need 5 hours of denoising turned around in 2 days. Okay, cool. I'm going to call the person that I met at an AES conference and say, hey, remember we talked about classical recording and how you were working on your RX skills? You want an opportunity? If they give me their information and I can get a hold of them and they're available, that's how I built my career. That's how I built my client base. Is I was always available. I always said yes. And if it was something I didn't know how to do, I would obviously be communicative about that. Say, look, this is my first time, doing a proper paid job in RX. Like, can you, be patient with me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? All of that is okay.
Totally.
Can't be reckless, right? But you have to show up.
Yeah. It's funny. It's because like you said, it's hard for people. It's difficult these days for people in the industry, but it's actually, everything you're saying here is kind of saying the opposite to some degree too. It's actually not that difficult. It's like, you just have to go back to those basics and you have to just focus on making things easy for people. And like, that shouldn't be a difficult thing. So as long as you are honest with people, you give them a way to talk to you, they understand who you are, what you do, and, all that kind of stuff, you're going to find those opportunities are going to come your way. So, or you're going to find those clients by just putting yourself out there and saying, hey, I'm a new mastering engineer. I want to record your stuff for free just to build up my portfolio. Is that fine? Like I might fuck it up, but like, I'm just doing this to work on my stuff. Like be honest with people and people are going to come give you that shot. So,
totally. We have a lot of storms here in Nashville. You're rarely going to have lightning strike where there's not also a set of weather patterns to dictate the conditions for lightning to strike. I think about opportunities like that. Like I'm not creating an opportunity for myself. I'm creating a set of weather around me for lightning to strike.
Yep. That's a great metaphor for it.
And all of those things are free. They don't cost money. None of that costs money. It does not cost money to return an email to someone. It does not cost money to Google someone whose work you like and drop them a line and say, hey, Eva Reisted, I love the work that you did on Aquaman. I want to learn more about sound scoring and mixing. Do you have 15 minutes for an informational interview sometime?
Yep.
Everyone in this industry wants so badly for the industry to continue to thrive and be healthy. And we will do anything it takes to help that next generation of engineers. But we're also busy. We're tired. We're just doing the best we can to pay our bills. Perfect example. I know we're not talking about vinyl specifically, but like,
no, it's all good.
I'm on a bit of a like how to get hired tangent. So I'm just gonna keep going.
No, it's all good. I think it's totally relevant and people need to hear that.
I had this is a good story. I never had an internship. And so I don't really know what it actually feels like to be an intern, right? Like I don't know what that feels like. I feel like it shouldn't be where I show up for work for 6 hours or whatever, and then all I'm doing is taking out the trash or getting lunch. Right? I feel like it shouldn't be that. But I see that a lot here in Nashville. Like internships are just like a way to be in the room or get credit or whatever. And very rarely there's someone who will really take advantage of it. And I remember there was like very, very early on in when I had my studio in the Bay, that studio did keep interns. And there were two guys that were hired around the same time to intern. And one of them would ask a bunch of questions and distract me from my work and spend like all day just like ogling over the gear and hounding the clients for praise and whatever. And the other guy would basically sit back, do what I asked him to do, yes. But when I wasn't specifically engaging him for something, he was going around the facility, because this was like an owner run facility. It was like just, me and Michael making sure everything was like okay. But this guy, when he saw a light bulb go out, he immediately went to the store, got a light bulb, replaced that fixture, and handed me the receipt at the end of the day. He took the trash out, not because I asked him to, but because he saw me taking the trash out the day before at the end of my day. There was one time a piece of gear went down, and he made the phone call to the techs around to figure out who could fix it, how fast, and how much it would cost. He basically created this opportunity where he built an extra hour or so into my day, that at the end of my day, I had energy and time to show him what I was doing all day and to teach him and to sit with him and listen to his mixes. And he basically made his own, he basically made his own little educational supplement by taking off my plate all the things that I would have to do before I could go home and, and see my partner. That was it really made a huge impression on me. And he's still to this day one of my very favorite people, one of my best friends. He's amazing, Nigel. And it's like that kind of person is the one who's going to be successful in a career in audio and music.
Yeah.
Because they're creating the opportunities for that lightning to strike rather than just sitting back or kind of going overboard and, and working on trying to impress me.
Of course. Yeah.
Time to get my attention.
I love that. I think it's so true. And that's definitely like a theme that's come up on the podcast before. It's like, it's making yourself so indispensable that like that's what people want. And so you just have to find ways to do it. And you have to kind of tie together everything we talked about here, where it's like you make yourself easy to get a hold of in the first place. Yep. And then once you're there, you make yourself indispensable and you make someone else's life so much easier that they need you around.
And Colby, my right-hand man now, Colby did the exact same thing. But funny enough, he did it from afar via the pandemic. Like it was very, very difficult for us to really connect properly until he finally moved here. But, he is one of those that just did not stop until he got my attention and made it so that I had no choice but to find a way to hire him.
Love that. That's amazing. Yeah. And I think that that's also really helpful for people to hear too, because a lot of people think that they need to be there, and and it's like, you can apply for jobs in places that are far away or whatever. You just have to be willing to put that work in. Heck, you could even do work remotely for a lot of these people. And as long as you're still doing that job of making yourself indispensable, then people want you around. Right. So,
we still do in the mastering studio here. Right now I'm sitting in the my studio is built into the downstairs of my house, like every studio in Nashville. I don't know if you've ever been to Nashville, but every house is a studio and every studio is a house. But yeah, Colby lives on the other side of town. And so he still is my mastering assistant for all of my gigs. And he does all my load ins, load outs, and QC via TeamViewer and audio movers. Like he doesn't have to come to the studio to do that job.
That's amazing.
And so then I get home, I get home at the end of a very long night at the plant, and I'm able to just sit down and master the records that need to be mastered. And then the next day he'll send them out. But it's like absolutely anybody in the world could do that job. It doesn't have to be Colby.
Yeah.
And one day I will be looking for a new assistant because Colby's getting his own mastering career going. So.
Yep. And you'll send them this interview and be like, just follow everything I just said.
Just listen to what I said.
Yeah. I'd love to kind of switch gears and talk. You mentioned your plant a couple times. And so I'd love to talk about the vinyl side of things and relating that to mastering, but also like the actual process of it as well. So first off, like what made you get started with having your own vinyl manufacturing plant? Because for a lot of people, that's a very ambitious thing.
It's very ambitious. Yeah. Honestly, it was a little bit selfish because I had all these mastering clients that were independent artists. Like I built my career working for independent artists. I work with a lot of the majors on, big projects, but it's still like my bread and butter and my drive and my favorite client are the ones that are just like the folks just trying to make it, just trying to figure it out themselves and doing everything they can, but still writing great songs and, rehearsing and playing in tune and stuff. But I had a mastering client. I remember it like it was yesterday. He sent in my vinyl masters to the plant to get his record made. And they converted them to MP3s. And then they converted my 9624 side A, side B, high res, carefully made WAV files, converted them to MP3s and cut those. So we got the record back and it sounded like dog shit. And I was like, why does this sound so bad? And he finally got back with the plant. He was like, he put me in touch with them and it was like pulling teeth, just trying to get any information. But he, I basically tracked it down. I was like, can you please provide me with what files you used to cut these? And then they had their cutter send me the files and it was MP3s. Like that is the peak of idiocy and silliness in vinyl. Like, why would you do that? Anyway, so after that, I was like, oh, this can't be that hard. I'll just start my own plant.
Just like that. Just so easy.
It wasn't like that. No, I actually used that opportunity to, I thought about it for a long time. And at that time, like going through that process, I learned that there was really no quality control happening at the plant. And I started building quality control systems for record plants. And I built not the first recorded like version of listening to a record at the plant, but I built the first scalable quality control system for record plants, using modern technology. I won't go into the details too crazy on it. It's proprietary technology that I then ended up using. We use it every single day at my plant, and that's what helps us maintain the fastest turnaround time in the business and extremely good quality records and a very low rejection rate, even at the test press. It's because we compare the original master to the test, to the production the production copies back to the master. It's a whole looping back iterative process where everything's all like giving me empirical data to say like, yes, this is a good pressing, or no, this is not a good pressing before it even goes out the door. But in building this QC system, I learned even more, which was that it's not just about the sound of the records and the quality of the cutting and the quality of the pressing that's a problem. I learned that the order process was a problem. The communication was a problem. Like when I started working in the vinyl manufacturing world, you were lucky if you could email a plant and get a response back within 72 business hours. You were lucky if you could scan in an order form and send via email and have it accepted. Previous to that, everything was done via fax, or a mailed in PO, like production order. Mailed in CDs with the vinyl cutting files on them. Like that was about as modern as it was when I started, more than 10 years ago now. Wow. So it's really come a long way, but it still has so far to go. Like communication about the supply chain is one of my biggest annoyances every day. I mean, we're a major manufacturing facility. We're not just like one press in a garage somewhere. We have a 15,000 square foot warehouse with 6 record presses running right now. We built out for 12. I've got 2 more going online, hopefully later this month. It's almost the end of July, but we probably won't actually be cycling those till the beginning of August at this rate. But 8 presses is a lot. There's only a few plants in North America that are of the size we are. And we work really, really hard on communication and, of course, quality. But, the actual pressing of the record is very, very hard. Record pressing is an extrusion molding process using plastic. So it's PVC and copolymer with acetate. And it's basically you're taking these little pellets of plastic and you're heating them up and you're sending them through a heated up barrel that in different zones warms them to a specific temperature based on what color, how much of it is virgin versus regrind, things like that. You're then creating essentially looks like a little hockey puck. You're creating we call it a preform. You put that preform into a hydraulic press, a 100-ton hydraulic press. So you're getting 2,000 PSI on 12-inch hydraulic ram. Most presses have a 2-stage ram. So you'll go into what we call slow squeeze. And that's where you're filling the molds. Because remember, this is a molding process. This is not like we're not cutting the record at this point. It's already been cut. We already have the stamper, which is the metal negative of the album. And those have already been affixed to the molds. So the molds are being filled with steam, and you're squeezing that hockey puck, that warm hockey puck, squeezing that into the stamper, and you're filling the stamper grooves technically with molten plastic. That plastic is then set with cold water that switches to cold water running through the mold now instead of steam. And when that cold water cycle is done, the press separates and opens, and then you trim off the excess to create that nice edge on the album. So the cool thing about records is we can make 2 a minute, but if you're working your ass off and every single thing goes right every single time, then you're making, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 copies that are all equally high quality. But that's the hard part. It's not that hard to make one record. It's not even that hard to make one great record. It's that every single thing has to happen the same way in perfection every single time to make production records.
Oh, yeah. I have a little bit of experience with vinyl manufacturing as well. And it just, it's the quality control is such an issue. And there's always work being done to make sure that it's consistent, and it's very difficult. So I don't envy you, that's for sure. How did you learn about this stuff? How did you get involved in cutting vinyl to begin with, or learning more about this manufacturing side of things?
Well, so I was obviously, really into mastering. I right out of grad school. Well, even while I was still in grad school, I got hired at a mastering studio, and then ended up working in another one, and then another one, and another one. But when I was in San Francisco, the reason I moved to the Bay Area instead of a couple other cities I was looking at was to learn how to cut records. There was a lathe at the studio that I was going to work at. And I was always just so fascinated with vinyl. And this is, obviously when Spotify had just hit Europe, there was not iTunes existed. You could buy a song on iTunes, but Apple Music wasn't a thing. Spotify was available, like I said, in Europe. Mog was around, so they were streaming higher quality audio at that point. But I was still really fascinated with the vinyl process, partially, I think, because I was so interested in the engineering of it. When you make a tape recording, it's it's a magnetic particles suspended in plastic. And so it's this, it's an electrical transduction, onto this tape. But when you make a record, you're basically employing every type of energy shift you possibly can. So if it's playing back from a digital system, you're going from computer ones and zeros to a, set of cutting amps. So you're into electrical, and then you're going to the stylus. So now you're into mechanical energy, with magnets. And then you're going into, when you go to playback, you have a stylus that's riding in the groove, creating essentially a matrix of positive and negative information, again, mechanical. And then you're going to electrical, and then, back. So I think I was just fascinated with the idea that every single one is a little bit different. And as a mastering engineer, my job is solely, at the end of the day, if all I've ever done is made sure that the record that I'm putting out has no quality issues and that it's technically ready to release, the only other thing that I'm supposed to do as a mastering engineer is to be in charge of the quality of the transference of sound between formats. So tape to vinyl, high-res digital to cassette tape, high-res digital to vinyl, high-res digital to CD, tape to streaming. And if we can keep the quality of the sound through all of those different changes of media and format that all have different limitations in sound, then, I'm doing a good job as a mastering engineer. But, like all things, I wanted to challenge myself. So, I really got into vinyl, and I got into I live in two brains almost, because I'm very interested in hi-fi and listening for pleasure, right? But my whole world is all about really the technical side. So, Catherine, my wife, who is a vinyl, we built an entire house in the backyard just to house her vinyl records and our extra listening systems out there. She is such a vinyl head and such a pleasure listening person. She wants the quality, of course, but she made records for 15 years in a studio. She's been around for that bootstrap style of recording, and, just try and figure out how to get cool sounds on tape. That's her world. I go from the completely other side of it. She says I think about music like a serial killer, essentially. I'm more analytical about it, and to the point where she wonders sometimes if I even enjoy listening. And the answer is yes, of course I do. But audiophile people and hi-fi people are so interesting to me. And I think that was the hook for me about vinyl, is okay, you got these guys spending $150,000 on a turntable, but then they hook their speakers up out of phase by accident and then complain about the sound of the record. There's so many things about vinyl and the vinyl industry that hooked me in, that I just, stayed with it. And then I was like, all right, I want to have Michael Fremer or John Atkinson write an article about the good quality records that I can press.
Yeah.
And so that was my goal, for a while at the beginning. I was like, I just want someone from the hi-fi world to think that I made a good record. I don't care about all the music people, the audio people, they all know I can make a good record. But I want the crazy audiophile guy that spent $5,000 on little tiny feet to lift up his cables off the ground, that they're all so that all the energy can go all the way around the cable all the time. I want those guys to think I made a good record.
I love that. Well, it makes sense then that mastering would be where you ended up, because, it really does cater to all of the extremes, right? You're going to get those people that are listening on their phone or their laptop speaker, and then you're going to have those people that are listening on those ridiculous systems. So, having that attention to detail throughout that entire process is really interesting. As far as the mastering side of things goes, especially when it comes to preparing for vinyl, are there specific specs that mastering engineers or people getting into mastering should be aware of in order to make sure that the cutting process goes smoothly?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you can find all this information out on the internet or on our website, but I'll say it. You're not going to want to have a very long side. when I say side, you have the A side of the album and the B side of the album. If it's a double album, it's A side, B side, C side, D side, and so on for however many pieces of vinyl. But for the traditional record like this one, we made this record for Ringo Starr a couple months ago.
Very cool.
This one is the A side and the B side. You have, you've got grooves that are cut into it by a lacquer cutter or a mastering engineer who has a lathe. Those grooves dictate the depth of them and the width of them, which is those things are related. That will dictate the length of the sound that you can put on side A or on side B. So best practice is, of course, this is all dependent on the program material. Don't ever take this as gospel, but best practice is somewhere between 18 and 20 minutes for a 33, somewhere definitely, south of 15, 14 for 45 is going to yield kind of the best quality results. It's going to give the engineer the most space to work with. It's going to give your music the best chance to sound good on an actual flawed medium. Did you know that, inherent to every vinyl record, there is distortion? Okay. The music is just covering that up. So dependent on the sound that's being cut into the disc, that will be the thing that masks that distortion. So funny enough, people are always like, "Why it should be more dynamic, right? Like more dynamics." It's like, no, a vinyl record actually has far less dynamic range than an analog tape, than a CD, because you have a mechanical style, a piece of literally a little tiny little rock dragging across this groove that is like just hanging on for dear life while you're, it's the record's spinning and literally trying to fling the stylus off out of the groove when we're still trying to play back and stay in that groove and still trying to have some fidelity. And oh, by the way, that vinyl has, there's friction too. So you're going to hear surface noise. You're going to hear pops and clicks. Even just the tiniest little speck of dust can make the loudest pop you've ever heard. And so, what you need is to understand that a format that is so flawed like this and is still here and still considered one of the, the most best versions of listening experiences possible, there are a lot of limitations. So keep your sides short. Keep your music not super essy and not super bass heavy. We can make a really beautiful bass heavy record. Like dance music goes on records amazing. But a lot of times it has to be things that are not super complicated. So I always just say the more complicated the music, the less simple the tones, the harder it's going to be, to cut a good loud record.
Yeah. On that note, I often hear people say with vinyl, the bass needs to be made mono, or you need to roll off certain frequencies and that kind of stuff. Does that actually apply?
I can make it mostly mono, but it's more if the bass isn't mono, you got other problems too, for sure. You're going to have problems playing back on small speakers on your, playing back a song that wasn't mastered properly for digital, where the bass isn't at least mono compatible. It's not going to play back on a phone. The other day, we were just packing records. And so I dragged in one of my PA speakers and I plugged my phone in and I played back a song that is one of my very favorite songs, one of my very favorite productions, but it's a flawed production. It's Sorry Not Sorry by Demi Lovato. And there's a moment in her choruses that she goes, baby, I'm sorry. And then her backups go, not sorry, right? But they're almost perfectly out of phase to make them feel wider. And so when you put that together and put that into mono, you lose those backups almost completely. They're just like a little ghost of the sound. So it was funny because we were just kind of jamming out and listening to this, just little ghetto blaster that I set up in the production space. And all of a sudden this song comes on. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's listen to, how well this was put together and how it will sound when it's just played back in mono, and how it'll sound on a small speaker or two small speakers close together, because that's what it'll sound like. If that was put on vinyl, you're going to have a lot of problems. So it's not so much that it's mono compatible. It's more about what you will lose when the bass is not mono compatible. Not a problem cutting specifically. I mean, we have elliptical filters on all of our consoles. We're going to steer all that bass toward the mono. But when it's summed, that's when you start losing the intelligibility of the bass and you lose the foundation of the mix. The bigger problem for vinyl cutting is related to high frequency distortion and an amount of limiting that we have to do for high frequency, because it makes the cutting amps go crazy. And a vinyl record can really only be, reproduce like 35 or so hertz up to about 16 kilohertz. Anything more than that, you're not going to have that information anyway. We have to band limit that with an EQ.
And is that something that you would generally recommend a mastering engineer take care of, like adding that high pass filter at 35 or low pass filter of 16, or is that something that they should leave in the hands of the plant?
There's only maybe 2 plants in the world that I would say, other than us, that I would say is a good idea to leave anything in the hands of the plant as far as audio quality goes. I say utilize a high-end, well-known mastering engineer who has extremely lengthy experience cutting records of all different genres, or a mastering engineer that can show you that they have done vinyl mastering prep files for multiple records that are sounding good. I've been in this industry long enough, and I was an early starter in vinyl prep files. Like, I can still remember the first set of vinyl prep files I ever sent, and I graciously got a note back from the mastering engineer that was going to cut it. And he said, "Piper, this is like pretty good, but you might want to look at the ends of these sides because this is going to distort."
Yeah.
So you got to be really careful. There's a lot of bullshit in this industry. There's a lot of people that are, right now, to be honest, in the vinyl industry, everybody's clamoring for work, because there was this crazy boom that happened in the pandemic where lead times were getting up to 2-3 years for returns on stuff. So people would overorder, and then that over-ordering caused the industry to think that there was this huge opportunity. And so these plants got off the ground and bought tons and tons of presses. And now there's, and like raised capacity because they thought that there was going to be this amount of ordering going on forever. But now that everything's calmed back down and turn times are back to what they should be, everyone's clamoring for work because now they have all of these giant pressing facilities that they have to fill with work. So what I would say is just be really careful about who says they can do vinyl stuff. Yeah. Talk to a real cutter. There's only a handful of contract cutters in the country. There's only a handful of mastering engineers with lathes in the country. And likewise, I would say there's maybe only a few more than that are creating vinyl record cutting files that are of a quality where, like, I wouldn't think about suggesting an adjustment before we cut it.
Yeah. So it almost sounds like, I'm just thinking of it from like the artist perspective. If someone is looking to get vinyl made of their records, you either need to hire a mastering engineer who has a lathe and can cut that master and make sure that it's ready to go for the plant, or you're looking at or you're maybe working with another mastering engineer who's going to do their best to,
and has a relationship with a cutter. And actually, the person who's going to cut it and the mastering engineer making the prep files, those two people need to be able to talk. They have to have a relationship. I'm not trying to be gatekeepy about it. I want to be clear. Like, this is a format that everyone can get into and can understand. And it's really not as hard as people think it is. But because of the state of the survival of a lot of these folks that are stakeholders in the industry, everyone's back to like the early aughts of like shooting from the hip. Yeah, we got it. We can take that. No problem. We got it. Just send it in. And we're going to end up back in that same cycle that created our problems to begin with, where people are so desperate for work that they don't give a fuck about the quality again. I can already see it. It's starting to happen again.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense then. Yeah. As far as the, like, you mentioned like sibilance being an issue or top end being an issue and adding the filters and that kind of stuff, and maybe the mono of the bass, but like, are there any other requirements that you can think of that would be helpful? Like I often hear about, vinyl masters are usually quieter in volume. So like, is that something?
As long as they're not clipping, we're going to turn them down or we're going to turn them up. It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
I mean, obviously the -7 lux that you're sending out for this big crazy pop record into, out to Spotify or whatever, that's not going to sound good on vinyl. When it's something like that, when it's very clear that all it is the digital masters turned down by 3 dB, we almost always ask for the mixes and we just recreate a vinyl master version of it for them.
Gotcha. So in the case of like a mastering engineer who's not doing the cutting, it's usually the plant that has their own kind of requirement of like, this is what we're going to cut it at, more or less, right?
Yes, no, I think what I was trying to say earlier is like, be careful because the plant will not always say this is not going to sound good. Fair. They'll take your money and they'll send it to their cutter and their cutter will cut it. But that person has no relationship with the project. They have no information. There's zero context for that person to know how this is supposed to sound. And that's why I say the mastering engineer and the person cutting it need to have a relationship. And we, at my place, we always try and put like as much context for whoever's cutting it in with, like, it's not just a contract job, right? We always try and build in all of the information possible. We provide the files that were released out into the world on Spotify last year. We give that to our cutters. We always create a system where there is almost no chance of us fucking it up unless we were not given the right information to begin with. Part of that is just because we care about the quality and we care about the recording. But part of it is also, to be honest, because we're a newer business. We're only a few years old. We don't have the luxury of having turn times be 6, 9, 10 months because somebody cut something wrong early on or whatever. We don't have that luxury. We built our business to support independent artists, and independent artists need their records right now. We also need the records out the door right now. So we do everything we can on the front end to set ourselves up for success with that artist.
Yeah, that makes sense. So speaking of turn times, I know a lot, like I run into this all the time where I'll be working with an artist and say, oh, how are you going to manufacture this? Or what are you going to do with it? And it's always like, yeah, we're going to make vinyl. And then our CD releases in like 2 months, right? And you and I were kind of talking about this before we hit record. Like, what advice do you have for someone who is planning ahead for vinyl manufacturing in terms of like lead times and preparing for the release?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of folks are adequately, setting up their expectations these days, finally. We get a lot of inquiries that are like, okay, release show is in a month. We expect vinyl to be, a few months after that. Sometimes we can even pull it off where, release show for the album, digital version and the CD version is in a month and we can get them records in a month. We do that all the time.
Which is wild because I'm so used to hearing people talk about months and months of lead time. So yeah.
This is where I got into vinyl because I realized early on that there is no need for things to take that long. It only takes so long to get stuff back from the printer. It only takes so long to send something for cutting. It only takes so long to press and assemble it. We, like I said, it's somewhat selfish because we've built our name and our reputation to support that. But at the same time, like we're still a new business. We do not have the luxury of waiting and waiting and waiting for stuff. So we get it done, we get it out, we get the next one in, get it done, get it out. And I'm a testament to the fact that like you cannot tell me that any job should take that long unless someone's fucked up. And things fuck up, things happen, shit happens.
Yeah.
Stamper blows, labels were printed wrong. Someone sent us in audio that was in the wrong order artists literally spelled their name wrong on their album jacket, and we had to have them reordered. Like things like that happen all the time. But yeah, I mean, if everyone's doing their job right and the lacquer is right, the stampers are right, the center labels are right, the jacket is right, and we have a shipping address to send it to, and people are being prompt in their communications to and from us, like there's no reason why any job should take more than about 8 weeks, 9 weeks tops.
That makes sense. I mean, yeah, with the right plant that has the right equipment and everything, and the recipe for success is there. It should work fast. So, well, I know you got a bunch going on, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But if people do want to learn more about you and your mastering business and your vinyl manufacturing business, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. Piper@piperpayne.com is a good email for me, and then I can point you in the right place. Piperpayne.com is where you can find all your information about me and my dogs who are barking above me. My cell is all over my website. My emails are everywhere. The plant is called Physical Music Product, physicalmusicproducts.com. Mastering company is called Nito Mastering, and you can find us on the internet. Thank you.
Awesome. I'll definitely include links to those in the show notes too, so people have them. It's been great learning more about your process and learning more about the manufacturing side of things too, because yeah, we've had people talk about vinyl mastering before, but I think to actually have someone who's doing it and at a scale that you are, it's coming into it from a different perspective and with a lot of different experience. So it's definitely great for people to hear about. And thank you for taking the time to do it.
Thank you so much.
So that was my interview with Piper Payne, and I thought it was really fascinating to learn more about the entire vinyl process. And I loved learning more about the little specs that go into preparing audio for manufacturing. And I thought it was helpful for her to go through the things like EQ filters and how that gets factored in when it comes to vinyl manufacturing, or the length of your records, or addressing the issues of like volume and whether you need to mono your bass, all that kind of stuff. Those are specs that are really important to understand if you want to make sure that your vinyl records get made properly and that you're mastering music properly for vinyl. So I love that she went into that and gave a lot of great advice there. And also I thought it was helpful for her to discuss like the difference between a lot of different manufacturing plants and understanding how they do things, because she brings up a really good point that like if you're trying to make sure that you get the most accurate pressing of your record, you need someone who knows what they're doing. And you need to have either a mastering engineer who can cut the vinyl themselves and make sure that that part is done smoothly, or you need a mastering engineer who has that relationship with the plant and knows that what they're doing on their end is going to transfer to what the manufacturing plants are doing as well. So I think that that's really good advice. And I've definitely heard in my days, I've heard lots of vinyl records that have turned out horrible because someone dropped the ball along the way, or, like kind of, I can relate to Piper's story about dealing with manufacturing plants that change the file format or how the files are actually set up. And then that could just absolutely ruin your records. So I love that Piper talked about why she got into this and then also how to make sure that you don't end up running into those same problems. I also thought it was really interesting to hear Piper's take on getting into the industry. Now, on this podcast, we've obviously talked about that before in terms of, being someone who's indispensable, being someone who is thinking ahead of the project and making other people's lives easier. That is definitely a really big part. But I thought it was interesting to hear Piper's take on like just simple things like being accessible. That's something that I don't think we've mentioned on the podcast because it seems so simple and so obvious, yet so many people drop the ball on it. And I think that that's something that is really important that you just have to factor in. You have to make life easy for people, and you have to make life easy for yourself if you want to break into this industry, get in front of the right people. And you can't just wait or rely on chance to make that happen. You have to put things in your own hands. And I think that some of the points that Piper brought up in this interview are very relevant in order to make sure that you actually have success in this industry, or you at least get your foot in the door as well. So I thought that was a really great chat. We covered a lot of bases here, and I hope that you found that interesting. I hope that you found it very helpful and that it inspires you with your own music or your own career. And if you did enjoy this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And if you're an artist who's working on your music and you're stuck trying to figure out how to get the highest quality sound, like Piper talked about how audiophiles are nitpicking every little detail along the way, right? We need to make sure that as artists or as engineers that we're making our tracks sound immaculate and clean and that they give people the energy and excitement that these tracks are supposed to have. So if you're someone who's struggling to make your songs jump out of the speakers the way that you hear in your head, and you want your tracks to sound polished and compete against other songs that you admire, I would love to help you get there. And inside of my coaching program, Amplitude, that's exactly what I work on my students with. We figure out, what do you want your song to sound like, and how can we go there? How do we have to record your tracks? How do we have to edit them? How do we have to mix them? And throughout that entire process, as you implement everything, you're getting feedback along the way to make sure that you're on the right path and that you're actually achieving the sounds that you hear in your head. So if you're interested in learning more about having a repeatable process from start to finish to get your song sounding every bit as good as you've always wanted, and you want that feedback, then I would love to help you inside of Amplitude. To learn more about that program, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/Amplitude, and you can find out all the details of the program there. And then I'd love to hop on a call with you to learn more about your current processes, your goals, what's working for you, what's not working for you, to see if I can truly help. Inside of this program, I only work with people who I believe I can help. So if that is not you, I will let you know. But if it is you, I would love to dive deeper into how we can work together and how we can get you the results that you need and direct you to the content and the techniques that are going to get you the results that you want. So once again, if you're interested in learning more about this program, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/Amplitude, and you can find all the details there. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit masteryourmix.com.